At my sister's wedding reception, my mom stood up and announced to all 200 guests, "At least she wasn't a complete failure like my other daughter, even her birth ruined my life and destroyed my dreams." Dad nodded, "Some children are just born wrong." My sister laughed cruelly. Finally someone said what we all think. The entire wedding party erupted in laughter at my expense. So I left quietly and never looked back. The next morning, Mom received a phone call that made her face go completely pale. "My name is Maya, and I'm 30 years old. My sister Clara is 28, and she's always been the golden child in our family." I wish I could say this story was out of character for my parents, but sadly, it wasn't. Growing up, I was constantly reminded that I was the mistake child, the one who supposedly ruined my mother's career prospects and my father's social standing. You see, my mother Helen got pregnant with me when she was 20, right before she was supposed to start law school. She never let me forget that I destroyed her dreams of becoming a successful attorney. My father George, who was from what he considered a respectable family, was apparently embarrassed that they had to get married so young because of me. Clara, on the other hand, was planned, wanted, and celebrated from the moment she was conceived. The favoritism was blatant throughout our childhood. Clara got piano lessons, dance classes, and expensive birthday parties. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about being grateful for what I had. When Clara struggled in school, they hired tutors. When I struggled, I was told I just wasn't trying hard enough. Clara's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and photo albums. My achievements were met with "it's about time" or complete indifference. Despite all this, I managed to put myself through college with scholarships and part-time jobs. I studied computer science and landed a good job at a tech startup right after graduation. I worked my way up over the years and eventually became a senior software engineer at a major tech company, making six figures by age 29. I bought my own house, traveled, and built a life I was proud of. Clara, meanwhile, dropped out of college twice, lived at home until she was 27, and worked part-time retail jobs when she felt like it. But when she met Eli, a guy from a wealthy family, suddenly she was the family's success story again. Their engagement was treated like Clara had won the lottery, and my parents immediately began planning what they called the wedding of the century. The months leading up to Clara's wedding were torture. Every family gathering became about wedding planning, and I was consistently excluded from decisions or treated like an inconvenience when I tried to participate. When I offered to pay for something as a wedding gift, my mother scoffed and said, "We don't need your charity, Maya. This wedding deserves only the best." I should have seen what was coming at the reception, but I honestly thought even they wouldn't go that far in public. The wedding itself was beautiful, I'll admit. Clara looked stunning, Eli seemed happy, and the venue was absolutely gorgeous. My parents had spent a fortune. They didn't really have to make sure it was perfect. I was seated at table 12, near the back, with some distant cousins I barely knew. Clara's college friends, Eli's work colleagues, and various family members filled the other tables. I'd brought my boyfriend Mark as my plus one, and he could already sense the tension in my family dynamics. The dinner went smoothly enough. I made polite conversation with the cousins, danced with Mark to a few songs, and tried to enjoy myself despite feeling like an outsider at my own sister's wedding. I even gave a small toast when they asked family members to speak, keeping it short and sweet, wishing Clara and Eli happiness. But then came the moment that changed everything. My mother had been drinking throughout the evening, which wasn't unusual. She always got more vocal and dramatic after a few glasses of wine. Toward the end of the reception, she suddenly stood up at the head table, tapping her champagne glass to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying across the entire ballroom, "I just want to say one more thing about my beautiful daughter Clara." Everyone turned to listen, expecting another heartfelt mother of the bride speech. I was only half paying attention, figuring it would be more of the same gushing she'd been doing all day. "I'm so proud of Clara," Helen continued, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. "She has brought such joy to our family. She's beautiful, she's kind, she's everything a parent could ask for." She paused for effect, and I could see the satisfied smile on Clara's face. Then my mother's expression changed, and she looked directly at me across the room. "At least she wasn't a complete failure like my other daughter," she said, her words cutting through the room like a knife. "Even her birth ruined my life and destroyed my dreams." The room went completely silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 200 people were now staring at me, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and rage. Mark grabbed my hand under the table, but I was frozen in place. My father George, emboldened by his wife's cruelty, decided to chime in. He nodded sagely and added, "Some children are just born wrong. It's nobody's fault, really, but some kids just never live up to what their parents hoped for them." The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, to my absolute horror, Clara started laughing. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable giggle, but a full-throated, cruel laugh. Finally, Clara said, raising her champagne glass. Finally, someone said what we all think. That's when the dam broke. Eli's groomsmen started chuckling. Some of my relatives began laughing nervously. Even some of the guests who barely knew me joined in, probably thinking this was some kind of family roast or inside joke. The entire wedding party erupted in laughter at my expense. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, taking in the scene. My own family had just publicly humiliated me in front of 200 people at what was supposed to be a celebration. They had turned me into the punchline of their perfect wedding day. Mark was furious beside me, starting to stand up, probably to defend me or confront them. But I put my hand on his arm and shook my head. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down in public. Instead, I quietly stood up, picked up my purse and walked out. Mark followed me, and we left the reception without saying a word to anyone. The laughter was still echoing behind us as we walked through the hotel lobby to the parking lot. Maya, Mark said once we got to the car, that was absolutely unacceptable. We should go back in there and... No, I said firmly. We're done here. I'm done with all of them. The drive home was quiet. Mark knew I needed space to process what had just happened. When we got to my house, I sat on my couch and cried for the first time in years. Not just because of what they'd said, but because I finally understood that they would never see me as anything other than their disappointment. That night, I made a decision. I was done trying to win their approval or prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless. I was done being their emotional punching bag. I was done with all of them, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. I couldn't just make emotional decisions in the heat of anger. Over the next few days, I carefully planned my exit strategy. First, I called my boss and asked if the company's offer to relocate me to our Seattle office was still open. It was. I accepted on the spot and asked for the fastest possible transfer timeline. They said they could have me relocated within 6 weeks, which was more realistic than I'd initially hoped for. Then I called my real estate agent and put my house on the market. In this economy, with my house's location and condition, she was confident we could have it sold within a month or two, especially if I was willing to price it competitively. I was. Next, I called the moving company I'd used before and scheduled them to pack and move my entire life across the country, coordinating with my work timeline. I also called my bank and had them transfer a significant portion of my savings to a new account at a different bank, one my parents had no information about. Over the next few days, I consulted with a lawyer about my options regarding the mortgage situation. I dialed the number for my parents' mortgage company. You see, 5 years ago, when my father's business was struggling and they were facing foreclosure, I had co-signed their mortgage refinancing to help them keep the house. They never asked me to do it. I offered because despite everything, I didn't want to see them lose their home. They accepted my help but never thanked me for it, treating it like it was something I owed them. Hi, I need to speak to someone about removing myself as a co-signer from a mortgage, I told the representative. It turns out, the process wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. Since I was a co-signer, I was legally responsible for the debt. However, there were options. I could demand that they refinance the loan without me, or I could trigger certain clauses that would require immediate payment or renegotiation. After consulting with a lawyer that afternoon, one of the benefits of making good money is having resources. I learned that I had several options, all of them perfectly legal. The most straightforward was to formally request removal as a co-signer, which would require my parents to qualify for the mortgage on their own or find another co-signer. Given my father's inconsistent business income and my mother's lack of employment, this was unlikely. If they couldn't refinance, they would need to either pay off the mortgage entirely or potentially face foreclosure proceedings. I also discovered that as a co-signer, I had been receiving copies of all mortgage statements and payment histories. My parents had been late on payments 4 times in the past year, something I hadn't been paying attention to, but which now became very relevant. The lawyer helped me draft a formal letter to the mortgage company and to my parents, requesting removal as co-signer and giving them 60 days to refinance or make alternative arrangements. But before I sent that letter, I had one more call to make. Monday morning, barely 36 hours after the wedding reception, I called my mother. Maya. She answered, sounding surprisingly chipper. I was just thinking about you. Listen, about Saturday night, you know how your father and I get when we've been drinking. We didn't mean anything serious by what we said. It was just family teasing. Actually, Mom, that's not why I'm calling, I said calmly. I'm calling to let you know that I'm moving to Seattle for work, and I'll be removing myself as co-signer from your mortgage. There was a long pause. What do you mean, removing yourself? She asked, and I could hear the shift in her tone. I mean exactly what I said. I've consulted with a lawyer, and I'm formally requesting to be removed as co-signer from your home loan. You'll have 60 days to refinance the mortgage without me or make other arrangements. Another pause, longer this time. Maya, you can't be serious. This is about Saturday night, isn't it? Look, we were celebrating Clara's big day, everyone was having fun. This isn't about Saturday night, I interrupted, though we both knew it absolutely was. This is about me making changes in my life and removing myself from financial entanglements that no longer serve me. But Maya, and now her voice was getting that desperate edge I'd heard before when they needed something from me, you know we can't qualify for the mortgage without your income. Your father's business has been slow, and with the wedding expenses. That's not my problem anymore, Mom. What do you mean it's not your problem? We're your family. Family, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call what happened on Saturday night? She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller. Maya, please. We made a mistake. We were drunk, we got carried away. You know we love you. Do you? I asked. Because I'm 28 years old, and I can count on one hand the number of times you've told me you loved me. I can't even count how many times you've told me I ruined your life. That's not. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. You meant every word. And you know what? That's fine. You're entitled to feel however you want about me. But I'm also entitled to live my life without being constantly reminded that I'm a disappointment to people who have never once acknowledged anything I've accomplished. Maya, please, let's talk about this. Come over for dinner tonight, we can work this out. No, Mom. I'm done working things out. I'm done trying to earn approval I'm never going to get. I'm done being the family scapegoat. But the house will be your responsibility to figure out. Just like it should have been 3 years ago. I could hear her starting to cry, which might have affected me a few days earlier. But after Saturday night, I felt nothing but a strange sense of relief. I'll be gone by the end of next month, I continued. My new address will be forwarded through my lawyer if you need it for anything legal. Otherwise, I think it's best if we don't have contact for a while. Maya, you can't mean that. What will I tell people? What will Clara think? And there it was. Even in this moment, she was worried about appearances and Clara's opinion. Tell them whatever you want, Mom. Tell them I finally became the failure you always said I was. I'm sure Clara will have some good laughs about it. I hung up before she could respond. Within the hour, I received 6 phone calls from my father, 3 from Clara, and 2 text messages from Eli. Apparently Clara had filled him in on the family drama. I didn't answer any of them. By the end of the week, the calls had escalated. My father left angry voicemails about family loyalty and responsibility. Clara left crying messages about how I was ruining everything and breaking up the family. Even some extended family members started reaching out, apparently having heard some version of the story. But I held firm. My house sold within 6 weeks, for even more than I'd expected. My company's relocation package was generous, and my new position came with a significant raise. Everything was falling into place for my fresh start. The mortgage situation played out exactly as my lawyer had predicted. My parents tried desperately to refinance on their own, but without my income to guarantee the loan, no bank would approve them. They reached out to other family members to co-sign, but everyone either couldn't qualify or didn't want to take on that responsibility. 2 months after my phone call, my mother called me again. This time, she sounded different. Broken. Maya, she said quietly, we're going to lose the house. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, and I genuinely was. I didn't want them to be homeless. I just wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. Please, she whispered. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly, I'll tell everyone what a success you are, I'll make it right. It's too late for that, Mom. It can't be too late. You're my daughter. Am I? Because at Clara's wedding, you made it pretty clear that you only have one daughter, and it's not me. She was crying harder now. I was drunk, I was stupid, I didn't mean it. You've been saying things like that to me my entire life. Drunk or sober, you've never missed an opportunity to remind me that I ruined your dreams. The only difference is that this time you said it in front of 200 people. What do you want me to do? I don't want you to do anything. I want you to live with the consequences of treating one of your children like garbage for 28 years. Maya, please, I have to go, Mom. I'm starting my new job tomorrow, and I need to prepare. That was the last conversation I had with any of them for 6 months. During those 6 months, I threw myself into my new life in Seattle. My new job was challenging and rewarding, I made new friends, I explored a new city, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless. The freedom was intoxicating. I could make decisions without wondering what my parents would think. I could share good news without bracing myself for backhanded compliments or immediate comparisons to Clara. When I got a promotion 3 months into my new job, I celebrated with my new colleagues without that familiar pit in my stomach that came from knowing my achievements would be minimized or ignored at home. My new team at work was incredible. They actually listened to my ideas and implemented many of my suggestions for improving our software architecture. My manager, Tara, was particularly supportive and became something of a mentor to me. She was the first person in a leadership position who had ever made me feel truly valued for my contributions. "You have great instincts," she told me during one of our one-on-one meetings. "I can see why the headquarters office wanted you here. You're exactly what this team needed." Comments like that still caught me off guard. I'd spent so many years being told I wasn't good enough that genuine praise felt foreign. But slowly, I started to internalize these positive messages and rebuild my self-confidence. I also started developing real friendships for the first time in years. Back home, I'd always been guarded in my relationships, partly because I was afraid people would see the same flaws in me that my family always pointed out. But in Seattle, I met people who knew nothing about my history and could see me for who I really was. There was Isabel, a graphic designer who lived in my apartment complex. We bonded over our shared love of hiking and terrible reality TV shows. She was funny and kind, and she never made me feel like I had to earn her friendship. There was also David, a colleague who shared my passion for vintage sci-fi novels, and Sophie, a woman I met in a pottery class who had the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to have people in my life who genuinely enjoyed my company, not because they needed something from me or because they were obligated to tolerate me, but simply because they liked who I was. The contrast with my family relationships was stark and painful. These new friends celebrated my successes without jealousy, offered support during difficult times without judgment, and never made me feel like I was walking on eggshells. It made me realize just how abnormal my family dynamics had been. Mark and I broke up about 2 months after the move. The long distance was hard, but honestly, the bigger issue is that he kept trying to convince me to reconcile with my family. He couldn't understand why I was holding a grudge over what he saw as one bad night. He didn't understand that it wasn't about one night, it was about a lifetime of being treated as less than. "They're your family, Maya," he would say during our increasingly tense phone calls. "Everyone says things they don't mean when they're drinking. You can't just cut them off forever over one mistake." But that's exactly what he didn't understand. It wasn't one mistake. It was the culmination of 28 years of mistakes, of being treated as the family disappointment, of having my achievements dismissed and my struggles ignored. The wedding reception was just the moment when they said out loud, in front of 200 people, what they'd been communicating to me my entire life. I tried to explain this to Mark, but he came from a loving, supportive family where conflicts were resolved with honest conversations and genuine apologies. He couldn't fathom the idea that some family relationships might be fundamentally toxic and irreparable. "You're being dramatic," he said during our last conversation. "Every family has problems. You can't just run away every time someone hurts your feelings." That's when I knew we were done. If he could reduce a lifetime of emotional abuse to hurt feelings, then he would never understand my decision or support me through the healing process I was just beginning. The breakup was sad but also liberating. I realized I'd been with Mark partly because he represented stability and normalcy, qualities that had been lacking in my family life. But I didn't need him to validate my worth anymore. I was learning to do that for myself. I started seeing a counselor around this time, Dr. Nora Patel, who specialized in family trauma and boundary setting. Our first session was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. "Tell me about your childhood," she said, and I launched into what I thought was a relatively normal story about sibling rivalry and parental favoritism. But as I talked, I watched her facial expressions change. She started taking more notes. She asked more probing questions. By the end of the session, she was looking at me with a mixture of professional concern and personal compassion. "Maya," she said gently, "what you're describing isn't normal sibling rivalry or even typical favoritism. What you experienced was emotional abuse and scapegoating. You were made the target of your family's dysfunction, and that's not your fault." Hearing those words from a professional was both validating and devastating. Part of me had always known that my treatment was unfair, but I'd also internalized my family's narrative that I was somehow defective or difficult. Having a trained therapist confirm that their behavior was abusive, not my fault, and not normal was a turning point in my healing process. Dr. Patel helped me understand the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. She explained how families sometimes designate one member as the scapegoat, the person who gets blamed for everyone else's problems and serves as a target for the family's collective dysfunction. She helped me see that my role as the family failure wasn't based on anything I had actually done wrong, but on my family's need to have someone to blame for their own shortcomings and disappointments. "Your mother's unfulfilled dreams of law school weren't your fault," she told me. "Your father's embarrassment about his social standing wasn't your fault. Your sister's need to feel special wasn't your fault. They made you responsible for their emotions and their failures, which is completely inappropriate. These therapy sessions were intense and often left me emotionally drained, but they were also incredibly healing. For the first time in my life, I was able to separate my own identity from my family's perception of me. I started to see myself as worthy of love and respect, not because I had to earn it through achievements or good behavior, but simply because I was a human being with inherent value. Mark and I had several difficult conversations during this period. He watched me become stronger and more confident, but he also struggled with my decision to maintain distance from my family. The man who had witnessed their public humiliation of me somehow still believed that family is family and that I should work toward reconciliation. Through the grapevine, mostly social media posts from cousins, I learned that my parents had indeed lost the house. They'd moved into a small apartment across town. My father's business had basically collapsed, partly due to the stress and distraction of their financial problems. Clara and Eli had apparently offered to help, but Eli's family wasn't thrilled about supporting his in-laws, and it had caused some tension in their new marriage. I felt bad about the house, I really did. It was the house I'd grown up in, and despite all the bad memories, there were some good ones too. But I also knew that if I hadn't taken this step, nothing would have changed. They would have continued treating me like their personal disappointment while depending on my financial support. 6 months after I moved, Clara reached out via email. It was a long message, full of apologies and explanations. She claimed she'd been caught up in the moment at her wedding, that she'd been drinking, that she didn't mean what she said. She told me about their financial struggles, about how the family was falling apart, about how much she missed me. At the end of the email, she asked if we could talk on the phone. I thought about it for a week before responding. When I did, I kept it brief. Clara, I appreciate your apology, but I'm not ready to talk yet. I need more time to process everything that happened. I hope you and Eli are doing well, and I hope Mom and Dad figure out their situation. She responded immediately, asking when I might be ready, if there was anything she could do, if I would consider visiting for Christmas. I didn't respond to that email. Christmas came and went. I spent it with new friends in Seattle, hiking in the mountains and having dinner at a restaurant with an amazing view of the city. For the first time in years, I had a Christmas without stress, without judgment, without having to defend my life choices or listen to comparisons between Clara and me. It was the best Christmas I'd ever had. About a month after New Year's, I got a phone call from my Aunt Nancy, my father's sister. We'd always gotten along reasonably well, though we weren't particularly close. Maya, she said, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from your mother. It's fine, Aunt Nancy. How are you? I'm well, honey, but I'm calling because I'm worried about your parents. And about this whole situation with your family. I sighed. Aunt Nancy, I appreciate your concern, but, no, wait, let me finish. I know what happened at Clara's wedding. Your cousin Tara was there, and she told me everything. What your parents did was inexcusable. That surprised me. I'd expected her to call and lecture me about family loyalty and forgiveness. But, she continued, I also think you should know how much they're struggling. Not just financially, but emotionally. Your mother calls me crying at least once a week. Your father barely leaves the apartment. They know they messed up badly. I'm sorry they're struggling, I said, and I meant it. But Aunt Nancy, this wasn't just about one night. They've been treating me like this my whole life. I know, honey. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't speak up when I should have. I saw how differently they treated you and Clara, and I should have said something years ago. Why didn't you? Because it wasn't my place, or at least that's what I told myself. But seeing what it's led to, I realize I was wrong. I should have defended you. We talked for almost an hour. She told me more about what had been happening with my parents, about how my father's business had completely failed, about how my mother had fallen into a depression and can barely function most days. I'm not calling to try to convince you to fix their problems, she said toward the end of our conversation. They made their bed, and they have to lie in it. But I am calling to tell you that if you ever decide you want to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with them, I think they've learned their lesson. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I admitted. That's fine. You get to decide what's right for you. But Maya, for what it's worth, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You built a successful career, you're independent, you're strong. You didn't deserve the way they treated you? That phone call stayed with me for weeks. It was the first time in my life that anyone from my family had acknowledged that my parents' treatment of me was wrong. It was validating in a way I hadn't expected. But it also made me think about what I actually wanted moving forward. Did I want my parents in my life? Did I want a relationship with Clara? Was complete estrangement really what was best for me long term? I decided to try therapy to help me work through these questions. My therapist, Dr. Patel, helped me understand that my feelings were completely valid, but also that I had options beyond the black and white choice of full contact or no contact. You get to set the terms of any relationship you have with your family, she told me. You don't have to accept their behavior, but you also don't have to cut them off forever if you don't want to. You can create boundaries that protect you while still allowing for some connection. After several months of therapy, I decided to reach out to Clara. Not to rebuild our relationship immediately, but to see if she was genuinely sorry and willing to acknowledge the harm that had been done. I sent her an email in late spring, almost a year after her wedding. I told her that I was open to talking, but that any conversation would need to include a real acknowledgement of what had happened and how it had affected me. I also made it clear that I wasn't ready to talk to our parents yet, and that she needed to respect that boundary. She responded within hours, agreeing to everything I requested and asking when we could talk. We had our first phone conversation the following weekend. Clara cried through most of it, apologizing repeatedly and admitting that she'd always known how unfairly our parents treated me. She said she'd been too selfish and too focused on being the favorite to speak up, but that losing me had made her realize how much she actually valued our relationship. I know I was terrible to you, she said. Not just at the wedding, but for years before that. I like being the golden child, and I didn't want to risk that by defending you. I'm ashamed of that now. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I appreciated her willingness to be accountable for her actions. We started talking regularly after that, slowly rebuilding some kind of relationship. She told me about the problems in her marriage. Eli's family had indeed been unsupportive about helping my parents, and it had caused ongoing tension. She also told me more about our parents' situation, which had continued to deteriorate. They ask about you constantly, she said during one of our calls. Mom has your picture on the refrigerator in their apartment, and she tells anyone who will listen about your successful career in Seattle. That's ironic, I said. I know. She's finally proud of you, but only after she lost you. After several months of regular conversations with Clara, she asked if I would consider talking to our parents. They'd been asking her to facilitate some kind of contact, and she thought they were genuinely remorseful. I wasn't sure I was ready, but Dr. Patel and I had been working on this possibility. She'd help me identify what I would need from them in order to even consider rebuilding a relationship. If you decide to talk to them, she'd said, you need to be clear about your boundaries and your expectations. Don't let them minimize what happened or rush you into forgiveness you're not ready to give. I told Clara I would think about it, but that if I agreed to talk to them, it would be on my terms. They would need to write me a letter first, acknowledging specifically what they had done wrong and how it had affected me. They would need to apologize without making excuses or trying to minimize their behavior. And they would need to understand that any future relationship would be entirely on my terms. Clara agreed to relay these conditions to them. 2 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother and another from my father. Both letters were longer than any communication I'd ever received from them, and both were filled with specific acknowledgments of their behavior and genuine-sounding apologies. My mother's letter included this paragraph: I have spent every day of the past year thinking about what I said at Clara's wedding, and I am horrified by my own cruelty. But more than that, I've been thinking about all the ways I failed you throughout your childhood and adult life. You were never a failure, Maya. You were never a mistake. I was the failure, as a mother and as a person. I let my own disappointment and insecurity turn me into someone who could hurt her own child. I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I want you to know that I see it now, and I'm ashamed of the mother I was to you. My father's letter was similar, acknowledging his role in creating a family dynamic where I was consistently devalued and dismissed. Reading those letters was emotional in a way I hadn't expected. I'd wanted this acknowledgement for so long, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I sat on the letters for a month before responding. When I did, I agreed to one phone conversation with each of them, with the understanding that this didn't mean I was ready to resume a normal relationship. The phone calls were difficult but productive. Both of my parents sounded genuinely remorseful, and neither of them tried to make excuses or rush me toward forgiveness. My mother cried through most of our conversation, telling me how proud she was of what I'd accomplished and how sorry she was for not supporting me. I know I have no right to ask for another chance, she said, but if you're ever willing to let me try to be a better mother to you, I promise I'll do everything I can to earn it. Those conversations happened 6 months ago. Since then, I've had occasional phone calls with my parents and a more regular contact with Clara. I'm not ready to visit them or to go back to any kind of normal family relationship, but I'm not closed off to the possibility that we might rebuild something someday. The most important thing I've learned through all of this is that I don't have to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. I spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who had decided I wasn't worth it, and I almost destroyed myself in the process. Setting that boundary, as painful as it was for everyone involved, was the best thing I ever did for myself. It forced my family to confront their behavior and its consequences, and it gave me the space I needed to build a life I actually wanted. I'm not sure what the future holds for our family relationships. Maybe we'll find a way to rebuild something healthy, maybe we won't. But either way, I know I'll be okay. For the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for someone else's approval to feel good about myself. And that, more than any revenge I could have planned, feels like the real victory. Some people might think I was too harsh, that I took things too far by removing myself as cosigner on their mortgage. Others might think I should have cut them off completely and never looked back. Honestly, I'm still figuring out what feels right for me. What I do know is that sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept unacceptable treatment and building a life that makes you happy, regardless of what the people who hurt you think about it. My family spent 28 years treating me like I was worthless. Now they know what life looks like without me in it. Whether that leads to genuine change and reconciliation, or simply serves as a lesson about consequences, remains to be seen. But either way, I'm finally free.